So, what kind of computer do you need to run PixInsight comfortably to process your astro images? And how can you make the best of that computer to eke the best performance out of your PixInsight installation at no cost to you? So there are some tips and tricks there. So in this video, we'll go through the specifications that are required/recommended for PixInsight. I'll go through some tips and tricks to get slightly better performance out of your PixInsight installation, and go, of course, through the details of what you need to look out for if you're looking at a laptop or a desktop computer and you plan on using it for PixInsight. I'm making this video on the trail end of another video, which is basically the ultimate guide to PixInsight, getting from absolutely no knowledge of PixInsight to becoming a master in one video. And then, of course, we need to understand, if you're going to trial or buy PixInsight, what machine, what computer you would need to run it properly. And by the way, if you're interested in this video, it was a lot of work and I've gotten amazing feedback on it. The link is up above and down in the description, and it's completely free. Plus, I provide the raw data for you to really follow along as we learn the ropes of PixInsight, starting from the installation. Anyway, what computer for PixInsight? I'm going to take something out of the way, like immediately. If you're a macOS user, then a Mac M2, M3, even M1 with the latest version of macOS and the highest amount of RAM, of memory, that you can get is the best. That's it. We're done. But if, like me, you hate macOS, I really can't stand macOS. I find it so hard to use, especially the window management, but that's another story. But yes, if you really don't care for macOS that much and you prefer a Windows PC, then we can look at the specifications that are important for PixInsight, from CPU, so processor, to memory, RAM, and also GPU for graphics card. Let's start with the official system requirements published by PixInsight, which are a bit crazy, to be honest. So when you look at them, don't be discouraged. I think it's highly exaggerated. But let's have a look. System requirements, updated July 2024. It is for the latest version of PixInsight 1.8.9-3. And yes, so they tell you stuff like the hardware architecture. It should be a 64-bit processor that supports SSE 4.2 instructions. Typically, if your processor was bought within the last 10 years, this is supported. You don't have any issues with that. If you have any doubt, you can go to the page of the processor from the manufacturer. So this is an Intel Core i7-7700K. I think that was released 8-9 years ago, something like that. And just search for SSE, and there you go. It supports SSE 4.2. We are good, no problem whatsoever. There was a time, by the way, where suddenly PixInsight was requiring also AVX2 support, which is actually less common. I don't know if they're going to try to pull that again in the future, but just to be safe, maybe you want to make sure that your processor supports AVX2. But yeah, anyway, that's the easy way to check that. But again, system requirements, most processors these days, they just support that. You don't really need to care about it. Operating system, you can run on your PC either Windows or Linux, and of course macOS is supported. Now, it's also interesting to note that Linux actually performs better. Like PixInsight running on their Linux on the same computer as Windows. If I boot into Linux and run PixInsight, things will be faster than if I boot into Windows and run PixInsight. So that's an interesting thing to note, and that's one way of getting better performance out of your PC, but it's a bit of an onerous way, because even if it's free, you still have to configure a dual boot system. It's a bit annoying, and unless you know exactly what you're doing, I wouldn't quite recommend it. In terms of Windows, you should be using Windows 11 ideally, and Windows 10 is also kind of unofficially supported. It works fine without really any issues. But that's for the OS/software requirements. What about the CPU? So the CPU there, if you look at the minimum reasonable processor and the minimum recommended processor, it's completely crazy. They put as a minimum recommended processor, they put in this list the flagship processor from AMD. Minimum? What the heck are you talking about? So they need to kind of like relax a little bit there. Basically, you want to look at your processor specs and you want to look at the number of cores in it. And if I look at my own processor in the PC that I'm using right now and the one that I use for my PixInsight processing, also for my video editing for YouTube, and for my live streams and for everything in my life, I use this AMD Ryzen 5800X. It's a budget-ish option, and we want to look at the number of CPU cores. That's the important stuff. In theory, PixInsight says like we need at least 8 cores, which, yeah, fine, but it will work even on 4 cores, 6 cores. It's just the more cores you have in your CPU, the better. And that's because these days, like a CPU is made of many such cores, and each core is a mini CPU that can handle independently tasks that are thrown at it. So each core can handle a different task at the same time, independently from the other cores, and then they can, once they're done with their tasks, they can get back together and decide what was the final output. And PixInsight can make extremely heavy use of that. If you're looking, by the way, at recent Intel CPUs, like 13th gen, 14th gen, so the number starts with 13 or 14. The important measure is the number of P cores, because they have E cores and P cores, and for PixInsight, it's the P cores that are important. But you can ignore all of that and look at just PixInsight benchmarks. There is this PixInsight benchmark page, but if you go to it, you get to a page like this, and by default, it will be sorted by total performance, but we want to look at the processor right now, so I recommend, selecting CPU performance and then clicking on reload here to reload the list, and then we can see the results of benchmarks that are within PixInsight, that have been ran by members of the community and then uploaded on the PixInsight website to see how well those processors perform. And it's, by the way, extremely easy to run a benchmark in PixInsight and to upload your own results here. I highly recommend that you do so. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. So first, we can use this list if you're planning on buying a PC or you want to see how well your PC is supposed to perform. Then you can look at this ranking here and you have the names of the processor. You see at the very top, there's the 7950X, which according to PixInsight is this one, which is a minimum recommended processor. Yeah, right. They also say some crazy stuff like Intel i9, i10, i11, i10, i11. They don't exist yet. They're like future-proofing. Yeah, I mean, come on, guys. Relax, relax. Anyway, you can look at the processors in there. And my own processor, the 5800X, if I search for it, it's not this one because that's the 3D variant. It's this one here. You can see it gets a much lower score than the top. It's actually kind of in the middle of the pack, roughly, of the benchmarks that we have for this version of PixInsight. This is actually my own benchmark run that I uploaded to this site, and it gets a decent score of 18,000. Compared to the top, that's around 43,000, right? But, that's, I think, a very, very good baseline. If you have a CPU that has this amount of benchmark, or you're planning on buying a laptop that has a CPU with this level of benchmark, you'll be absolutely perfectly fine. And really, that's what I would recommend for the CPU. Just look at the PixInsight benchmark. Maybe number of cores, this stuff is like unreasonable and completely crazy, so feel free to completely ignore that. Now let's go to something further, which is the RAM. The RAM is the super high-speed memory that is available to your CPU, to your processor. So your processor will load stuff from your disk into RAM, and the larger the amount of RAM, the better, but also the faster the RAM, the better. And RAM can be very difficult to choose from. Let's look here. The specifications are only mentioning the amount of RAM, but I'll go into further details about, especially if you're buying a desktop computer, what you should absolutely check about your RAM. Because, okay, let's see. Minimum required amount of RAM, 16 gigs. Yes, these days you can still buy laptops or even MacBook Pros, I believe, with only 8 gigs of RAM. Whatever you do, do not do that. Get at least 16 gigs of RAM. My own computer, the desktop computer that I use, has 32 gigs of RAM, which is the minimum reasonable amount of RAM. And it's working perfectly well, although I'm sure that in the future I will need at some point to update to like 64 gigs, but I'm not having any issues right now. If you want to go crazy, you can go to 128 gigabytes of RAM, and that's getting a bit crazy. Now, it's very important to note that when you buy a laptop, depending on the laptop, you may or may not be able to change or upgrade your RAM. So in many laptops these days, the RAM is actually soldered onto the board, so you cannot replace it easily yourself. The quantity of RAM is not the only thing that matters. You want to keep track of something that is very important if you're buying a PC, especially if you're buying a desktop PC, because normally it should be spec'd out the type of RAM that goes in. These days, I would recommend going for a type of RAM that is called DDR5. There's also DDR4, but that's older RAM. That's what I have, 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, but DDR5 is available, get it. Also, with RAM, you will see a frequency that's attached to the RAM, like 7500 megahertz. And that number, the higher, the better. You might also see some timing measure, something like CL18 or something like that. If that number is also published, know that the lower, the better. So that's something that's important to know about RAM. In particular, AMD processors, they love fast RAM. So something to keep in mind. There's also one more thing to keep in mind with RAM is that, especially for a Ryzen computer, but also for an Intel processor, you absolutely want your RAM set into dual channel mode, meaning that in your computer physically, there are two sticks, two bars of RAM that can work kind of independently. That's called dual channel RAM. And it's absolutely critical, especially if you have an AMD processor. Do not buy a laptop or desktop that advertises like single channel or single slot of RAM. That is horrendous and it should not happen these days, but it still happens a lot. You might also hear from some integrators or PC builders that DDR5 RAM, the type of RAM that I mentioned earlier, it runs in dual channel by default, even if you have a single bar of RAM. While technically true, it's also BS. You really want to have like 2 bars of RAM in 2 RAM slots. So that's something to keep in mind, and something that if you're buying a PC, you should double check, like, is this fast RAM and is it in 2 slots? And the latter, if you're going to buy 64 gigs of RAM, as it is right now, it guarantees that you will have dual channel RAM, because there's no 64 gig single card of RAM that I'm aware of. But this is something to keep in mind if you're buying a PC. Then we have the next thing, which is graphics and video. So graphics card for native vanilla PixInsight doesn't really matter. So you don't need to care that much about it, except if you're going to use AI-powered processes, which you are. So something like Blur Exterminator, StarNet++, Graxpert Denoise, Graxpert Background Extraction, and those last 3, they're free. So you really want to use them. And they can work just from your processor, from your CPU. But if you have a GPU, or also known as graphics card, specifically an NVIDIA GPU, you can accelerate that process, and your AI processes will take something like 10 times less, even with a low-end type of GPU. And even low-end NVIDIA GPUs, so the current gen is like the NVIDIA 4050, there's the previous gen 3050, the 2050 as well. They support this AI acceleration. They make a huge difference. And if you want to double check that a computer you're looking at has an NVIDIA graphics card, and that NVIDIA graphics card can support AI acceleration, which again I highly recommend, then you want to go to this website here. Again, links will be in the description, and you want to look at this CUDA-enabled GeForce and Titan products. You want to make sure that it supports at least CUDA 6.1 here. And you can see the oldest one is the GTX 1060, which you can buy for absolutely nothing on the used second-hand market these days. And that will support AI acceleration. And the impressive part is that even those cheap GPUs, that as long as they have 6.1 or higher next to them, even if the GPU is super cheap, And it's very low capacity by today's standards. It will still accelerate your AI processes like crazy. Oh, and you can see actually even the GTX 1050, which really costs nothing if you find it secondhand, will support that. So while you do not need that for like vanilla PixInsight, you really want to have that for those AI processes that I use all of the time. It really is worth it. And then we get to the last part of the specifications, which is really the hard disk or the SSD that you're going to be using. PixInsight, especially when it's stacking, can use a lot of storage space, and PixInsight also loves very fast storage. You want to look at the specifications of the drive. If the drive is a hard disk, an actual physical turning platter disk, do not under any circumstances go for that. Like no, big no, absolutely not. If the drive is called an eMMC, it's better than a hard disk, but yeah, it's better to abstain. If the drive is a SATA SSD, it's okay. It gets better, but that should be quite rare. Most of the time these days, we'll see M.2 NVMe drives. Sorry if it's a lot of words in there. And what's very interesting is that in a lot of laptops and desktop computers, and yes, laptops as well, even very tiny ones, it's usually possible to upgrade your storage fairly easily. Some laptops even have like a door with only one screw to remove that. You can then switch the drive. And the types of drives that I recommend are M.2 NVMe drives, like the ones that I show here. Like Samsung is kind of the reference for those drives. Samsung is the one I use in my desktop PC. And the price is not that high. Like this is slightly slower speed. That's why it's like kind of cheap, but still very, very fast. $70 US for 1 terabyte of super fast hard disk space. Absolutely great. But that's basically for the overall specifications. Now, before I go into the some like, how do you use from those specifications, if you're buying a laptop or a desktop, how do you make the link between what you read on the PixInsight page and what I've been rambling on about and what you're actually buying? But before we go there, I want to show you how to make PixInsight faster for free. Also, how to run the benchmark in PixInsight. Oh, but before we go to that, don't forget to go down below, click that like button, leave a comment about any recommendations you might have for a laptop or desktop, or any questions you may have. And if you're new to the channel and you like astrophotography, you could consider subscribing using that subscribe button. That bell icon is also pretty nice. And if you want to support the channel at no cost to you, and you're planning on buying anything from Amazon or Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have in the description, it will help me out, again, at no cost to you. If you want to sponsor the channel more directly, you can become a channel member using the join button next to that subscribe button, or join my Patreon using the link down in the description. And channel members, Patreons, you guys, you make the channel possible, you know it, and thank you so much. Okay, let's go back to the video. So if you're in PixInsight, or a simple way to estimate the performance of your computer for PixInsight is to go to Script, Benchmark, and then you have PixInsight Benchmark. It will tell you some stuff there. You can click on Enter, and then you can just click on Run Benchmark. While you're doing so, it's better not to have any program running. I'm capturing my screen, so I'll get a lower score than usual. Just like make sure only PixInsight is running, then click on Run Benchmark, and you'll get a score which you can compare to other scores on the benchmark page that I was looking at earlier. Again, the links are in the description. And you can see this is the result of my benchmark. What's very interesting and what I highly recommend you do is that you can run the benchmark 3 times in a row, at least 3 times in a row. And once you're done, you can click on the Submit button there. If I try now, it will tell me like, yeah, you need at least 3 benchmarks. It's very fast. It will take you 5 minutes to run 3 benchmarks on your computer and click on the Submit button. You'll get a dialog where you can specify further information, but you can leave everything blank, click OK. And that way you will enrich the benchmark page that I was referring to, and it will be very useful for the community as a whole. So I highly recommend you do that. Okay, and now how can you make PixInsight somewhat faster for some processes? Well, you can simply go to Edit, Global Preferences, And under global preferences, you'll have directories and network. And in here, by default, you will see like kind of one folder, only a single folder there. And what you want to do is make sure that whatever folder PixInsight is using is on the fastest drive you have, if you have multiple drives in your system. Once you have identified that it's on the fastest drive, or if not, you can remove that folder and add another folder. You can create your own, and you can add the same folder multiple times for a small boost in performance. I've seen up to 10% performance increase for some processes, and it's completely free to do so. The way that I do it is I basically, I went from 1 to 4, ran the benchmark, and I saw that my score had increased. And I could go from 4 to 8. I ran the benchmark again. I saw no difference, and so that's how I left it. The benchmark has 3 scores: the total score, the CPU score, and the swap score. And the swap score will basically depend on that. So that's what you would be looking at here. Just find the balance for you and make sure that you use your fastest drive. Your fastest drive is very important. My original benchmarks on this PC, I had the folder set up unbeknownst to me to a slower drive. And you see my swap results was around 8500. When I switched my folders to a faster drive that I had already in the PC, and for that, I just created a folder in that drive, and I pointed PixInsight 4 times to it. Suddenly, it doubled to 16,000. Much, much better. Okay, so now let's say that you actually want to buy a new PC, and you want to make sure that that new PC is going to work well for PixInsight. Obviously, you have the choice between a desktop PC and a laptop. And a laptop is so much easier because it comes with the screen, the keyboard, all of the accessories, just like all in one package. Plus, these days laptops can have really powerful GPUs and really powerful CPUs and a lot of RAM and very fast disks. So they work quite well for our purposes. Laptops do have the drawback that even if the name of the CPU and the name of the GPU are the same as desktop PC, they are given less power, less energy to work with, and so they will be slower than a desktop PC. And even within laptops, like 2 laptops with the same graphics card, one of them might be giving more power to the graphics card than the other, and that's not reflected in the specifications, and there will be a performance difference between the laptops. It can get very confusing. Add to that laptops lack customizability or upgradability. Typically, you're unable to update or upgrade the RAM, the memory. And of course, you cannot update the processor or the graphics card of a laptop as you can with a desktop computer, but still, it's a very easy all-in-one thing. So if you're planning on buying a laptop and you want it to run PixInsight really, really well, I would say one of the best ways to get to that is to buy a gaming laptop, because gaming requirements and PixInsight requirements actually have a lot in common. And of course, you get like more or less budget gaming laptops, and you also get super high-end ones or fairly high-end ones. And it's in various forums. The laptop that I always see popping up is something like the Lenovo Legion. And you can see it's like this laptop. It's not cheap. It starts at basically $1,900 US, cheaper than the ZWASI 2600 MC Duo or Air. But it's still not cheap. And with that, you can see it has all of the specs that we could ask for. It has an Intel i9 14900HX processor. If we go to the benchmark, you can see this is it. It has a score of almost 29,000. It is actually, for PixInsight, according to the CPU benchmark, better than my own desktop CPU. At the same time, you can see it has an NVIDIA GeForce 4070 card, which supports the acceleration for our AI processes. So that's great. It's also a pretty high-end card, so it will be really, really fast. At the same time, it also has 64 gigs of RAM, and you can also have higher storage. So if you go to the fully upgraded model with 4 terabytes of storage, which is awesome. That's probably what I would go to if money was no object. You're at at 2,060 US dollars. So not cheap, but that's basically like probably the ultimate PixInsight laptop that money can buy. And there are, of course, various alternatives, kind of cheaper, like this one. It's a different brand, it's Asus, and you get 12,700H. It's not super powerful, but it's good enough for PixInsight. It gets the GPU for our AI acceleration. It gets the 64 gigs of RAM, and it gets a lot of storage space. So that's really good for us. And if you want something more budget, we go down to 1,100 US dollars. There's this, right? It has an older Intel CPU processor, but if I look at the benchmark, the score for that CPU was 15,000. So it's a bit below my own desktop computer, but it's still very decent. And at the same time, it does have a NVIDIA card compatible for our AI process acceleration. It has the 64 gigs of RAM, and it has a 2 terabyte SSD. So this is also pretty much all that we would need for PixInsight, although it would be a somewhat slower experience than those more expensive laptops. It is what it is. Now, I haven't personally tested any of those laptops. It's just especially the Legion, the Lenovo Legion has great reputation from the forums that I've looked at, but I haven't tested them personally. I just want to show you how you can basically match the specs of the computer that you see online to the requirements of PixInsight. Now, what about desktop computers? Desktop computers, they'll typically be more powerful and cheaper for like better bang for the buck than a laptop. But it depends really on the systems integrator, the person or company that actually builds your computer. And those system integrators, they tend to take quite a fee. And so it makes it less of bang for the buck than you would expect. Another possibility, of course, is to build your own desktop PC. And that's what I've done in the past. But then you need to learn a lot. It's a very fun project though. And if you are interested in building your own desktop PC, there are sites like PC Part Picker. I'll put the link in the description that can help you find the parts like the CPU, the motherboard, the GPU, the RAM, etc., to make sure that everything is compatible together. Especially the RAM can be a pain because motherboards each have like their list of compatible RAMs and it's a bit of a mess and it can get quite complicated. But if you're up for a challenge, building your own PC can be very fun. I'll also put a link to a video up above and down in the description to a 2024 guide on how to build your PC for complete beginners. So if you're ever interested in doing so, just remember, for PixInsight, you'll need a decent processor. The more cores, the better. If your budget is infinite, the 7950X is great from AMD. You're going to need a graphics card for the AI processes, but you can cheap out a little bit, like a 3050, 4050, 4060. Those are relatively cheap, and they will do perfectly fine for those AI processes. You're going to need 32, but better 64 gigs of ideally DDR5 RAM, and make sure you get 2 sticks of RAM so that you can run it in dual channel. And then you're going to need an M.2 NVMe drive to store all of your data and your operating system. Those are basically the main components that you will need. Of course, also a power supply, that kind of stuff, but it gets a bit more complex there. And so are you planning on buying a PC? Are you planning on upgrading your PC? What are you going to buy or upgrade to? Let us know down in the comments. And is PixInsight one of the main use cases you're looking for that PC? Again, down in the comments. While you're going there, if you thought this video was useful, please give a like or a dislike. And if you have any, opinions about which PC is better, any recommendations, again, put them in the comments. And if you're not, leaving a comment, just double check what people have said in the comments about like their recommendations, because that way we can pool our knowledge. With that, I hope this was interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.